Non, j'ai plus droit. Elle m'a prouvé non, aucun rapport. Je sais pas ce qu'elle attend. C'est à moi qui voulais à toi ça. Tu dois être perdu.
Okay, let's start. You ready?
Yes.
Yes. Morning, everyone.
Salam alaikum. Ça marche
So
pas beaucoup.
I'm Mrs. Dortel. I'll be your teacher for the 4 next classes, so the 3 next classes and today, right?
Ça sera notre prof pour les 4
If you
prochaines.
need to see me or if you have any question, well, you can comment at the end of the course.
Si tu as des questions, on va l'avoir à
Or
la
you
fin
can
du cours.
send me an email asking for an appointment. My office is in the first level, so the office is C330. Okay?
Si tu as des questions, tu m'envoies un mail.
Because I had this question yesterday, I'm going to talk a little bit about the exam, because I guess you have no information about that.
On va parler des examens.
Can you confirm?
Là, tu comprends.
Yeah? Okay. So I thought Mr. Chuxon gave you a few ideas on the first class about the exam, but the format of the exam is a multiple choice quiz, a QCM, right? You probably have 20 questions, and it's probably a mix of question with one answer only and several answers as well. Okay? So you need to know dates, numbers, authors when you have references to some work, right? And how could you work? Well, you know you have the slides on abilities, you have each presentation. So what you should do is look at the slide and ask yourself what's the main idea of the slide. Yeah? And if you can answer this question, well, I guess you're sort of ready, right? So that's the main information I would like to give you. You know, for the schedule, the exam is in January, but we don't know the date now. That's the Scolarité who decides the date of the exam, and not us. Okay? For the marks, the grades, I have no idea. I need to ask Mr. Truxon if you have a negative point if the answer is wrong or not. Okay, so we'll need to check that and we'll tell you that. Okay? Do you have any question?
juste sur la présentation.
We're going to focus on main ideas about gender and language and changes in vocabulary, grammar, what happens in English, okay? And then the next two courses are about phonetics and phonology. That's going to be tough classes, more technical, so you will need to hang on, right, on this. And the last one is about prosody, probably something very new for you. Maybe you've heard of it, I don't know, so we'll discuss about it in the last class. And we're going to link prosody with the acquisition of language and foreign language as well. So the idea of how does it work? Why is it difficult to learn English? If it is difficult. And we're going to focus more particularly on French learning English. Okay, French learners of English. Is it all right? Still a question? Okay. So let's start with these topics in linguistic, gender and sexism. So, when we study language and when we study language and society, that we call social linguistic, you may be aware of it, right? The social linguistic. You study language according to different variations. So you have language variation, pronunciation variations, you have geographical criteria, register differences, style differences, social acts. That is, you study the language according to age, according to professions. Okay? And there is another parameter which is very important here, that is gender. So common to any human being, right, is the gender. So we're going to study today language according to gender, right? So male, female, masculine, feminine. So one of the most important social differences between human is this idea of gender. And the question for today is how gender differences are reflected in human language. So how gender differences are reflected in human language. And that's why we're going to talk about genderless. When you start studying this, we talk about genderless. Okay, that's what it means. So typical woman's language, typical man's language. And we'll talk also about sexism, that is linguistic sexism, that we can observe around us in society. So one of the major questions, the first question is, do women speak differently to men? Or do men speak differently to women? We insist on the first version, that is, do women speak differently, because in the mind of the people, that's something which is really strong, actually. So it's not an obvious question, as we are well aware that we do have voice differences between men and women. That's something we know. That's something research has proved, right? The differences in voice quality. We do know that women talk with a higher pitch, right? It's really physical. It's just that women have a smaller glotis. Here you have a glotis, right? That you use when you speak, and the glotis of the woman is smaller. That's why the pitch is higher. That's the explanation. So, apart from that, apart from a higher pitch, what do we know about women language and men language? Well, we do have differences between men and women, and that's always very interesting to look at this in newspaper or books. Maybe you have already seen things like that. This is a cartoon showing popular belief about what exists in the mind of the people, that is the idea that women talk very differently, right? And there are plenty of jokes about that. And this is a representation, this is an illustration of one of the jokes that you can find in the literature. So this is a short cartoon based on this joke, and this is just for you to remember that most people are convinced that there is something special with how women speak. they're talking woman, a tough language. I'm a tough woman, no way. Absolutely. You just know a few nouns. I'm a perfect woman, better than Pat as a native, or $5, $5. So they bet money on the fact that it could speak women, right? So you can see Steve going to see women next table. Hi ladies, I'm feeling unfulfilled. My mother's a controlling crew and my butt's growing wider than Rhode Island. You too? As you can see, the result is not really convincing, right? So, what it really shows is that there is people think there is something stereotypical about how women talk and how men talk as well. And when we switch the role, men versus women, well, actually can become very offensive and even mocking as well. So, another question about language and gender, apart from whether men and women are talking differently, you can say that this picture here that you can see on the side gives an idea that fundamentally men and women are not really different, right? On the surface, we may see different attitudes, language, but when it comes to falling out, well, the argument used is not really the same, right? So the other area of research in linguistics society is the language itself. As we said, we studied language according to different variations and variables as well. So the question, whether the language is sexist, so how sexist is it in society? So this was an important target at the beginning of the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s. So these feminist movements try to pinpoint sexism in society and in social life. So one of the manifestations of social life actually is language. So they target language as well. Let me give you a quote from Robin Morgan, so in 1977. The very semantics of the language reflects women's condition. We do not even have our own name, but bear that of the father until we exchange it for that of the husband. So that should remind you of the situation of the traditional mode that we have in the society, that the child gets the name of the father, and if it's a girl, then when the woman gets married, they exchange the father's name for the one of the husband, right? So, this is not actually true right now. Nowadays, you have the choice, but it used to be like that. Remember, it's in 1977. So, the idea is that this is not exactly language, but the procedure which has consequences in language use, right? So again, keep that in mind. This is not the language, but the procedure which has consequences in language use. And there is another example of sexism in language, and more particularly in vocabulary. If you look at the words on the board, chairman, spokesman, barman, and then later we talk about the he, the generic he. Well, because women used to stay at home, the condition was a bit different decades ago. So because they used to stay at home, looking after the children, the husband, the house, etc., all the expressions and vocabulary that you find referring to jobs or professions are very often linked to man, right? So this is actually problematic. The conditions have changed, the society has changed, so we have a real need for new vocabulary. So we cannot call a woman a chairman, a spokesman, or a barman, right? So there is a real need, the urge for vocabulary change, right? And the default, what we call the default term, which is masculine, right? So from these ideas, let's see what happens in language when that changes the society and how these changes in society affect the vocabulary, for instance. Here you have an example of other clues of sexism, still in the vocabulary or the way to describe men and women at work. So this is an extract from a student's newspaper back in the 70s again, and the heyday of the feminist women, right? So they are mocking common attitudes toward business behavior, and it was just before the 70s actually, yes? So 1976, so we are around the movement. So it was a bit sudden, right? The changes in society, what happened is that people will qualify behavior differently, right? At that time, when we talk about business, well, we say businessman. It was very difficult to consider that you could have a businesswoman, right? So this extract from the articles shows you attitudes qualifying men and women. What can you observe? You have qualities written in blue, so we took the stereotype colors, blue for men and magenta for women, right? So qualities written in blue are used to describe men's behavior. And if you have a look at it, aggressive, good on details, follows through, firm, is in French to say, authority, plasma, climb the ladder, success. Well, this is rather neutral or even sometimes positive. If you compare this with the address to women, well, people have a tendency to use adjectives which are very often negative. So when you say for a businessman that he is aggressive, well, you say a businesswoman is pushy. When you say a businessman is good on details, we say that a woman is picky, which is quite negative, has a negative connotation. Okay? And so on and so on. It follows through, she doesn't know when to quit. He stands first, she's hard. He isn't afraid to say what's on his mind, she's mouthy. He exercises authority diligently, she's diplomatic. He's close now, she's secretive. He climbed the ladder of success, she's left her way to the top. So, what does this show actually is a kind of misconception about careers. So, about men and women, right? So, how both reach the top. And this is supposed to be fun, but actually it shows how these words really reflect many people's misconceptions about men and women. Another proof that you have expressions related to women and men, and the expressions related to women are often more negative than those related to men. And this is the existence of sexist language. So we can observe in the language degrading words and sexual terms that clearly treat women as sexual objects. And we've got loads of words like this. So here you have a list again in magenta, a vocabulary describing women, well, dish, piece of ass, piece of tail, bunny, chick, pussy, bitch, doll, slut, cow. Nowadays, we do have some expression relating to man as sexual object, but when you look at the list, what can you conclude? Well, it's first slightly better than the ones used for women, and they are less numerous as well. So what do you have? Boy toy, stud laughing, hunk, joke. So you see there are just a few of them. There are are much less pejorative and far from the image of sexual objects compared to women, right? So you probably learned a lot of words right now, so if you need to look at the dictionary for the definition, feel free to do it, right? You're going to learn lots of things. Remember we talked about the generic he, so the default term, the masculine. Well, just to give you the example for the generic term, the fact that this idea to use masculine as the default term, well, you could find sentence like, a doctor can treat you for a wide variety of diseases. It's important that he understands your health history. So this used to be the way of referring back to the doctor with the pronoun he, meaning that most people assume that the doctor will be a man and not a woman. Another example, successful businessmen understand how to negotiate good deals. Again, when someone is working in business, this person is necessarily a man and not a woman, right? So, this is to show you how sexism is reflected in language via stereotype with different adjective expressions, the masculine default gender, when referring to people whom you don't know the gender, right? Another point about gender and language is this question, actually. How changes and attitudes in society reflect the change in language as well? So you can see that both are really linked together, right? So this is like, well, language is changing all the time. Vocabulary is evolving all the time, and you know that we don't have the same vocabulary centuries ago that we do have now. It's the same thing for the pronunciation. We used to pronounce words very differently centuries ago. It's the same thing, okay? So how changes and attitudes in society reflect the change in language as well. Let's see a few examples. In some cases, you do have words for both gender. That is, if you look here, you have the word actress. Sorry. So you have the word actress, and you will have the word actor. Okay? So you have the feminine ending with S, and the masculine with O. Right? So you have two terms according to the gender. But let's see now how language tries to find ways to use neutral terms in order to avoid to be sexist. So again, keep in mind that it's not the language which isn't sexist, but the society who wants to be less sexist. So that's why they change language. So in the first case, you have words for both genders, right? But if you look at stewardess, which is feminine actually, with the S ending, well, nowadays this term has been replaced by something called flight attendant. So there is no way to determine whether the person is a man or a woman. The same happens to words like anchorman and a woman. Well, anchor is someone leading a TV show, if you don't know what anchor is, right? So someone leading a TV show. So the ending disappears, and nowadays you can use just the term anchor, which is neutral. Chairman, chairwoman. Well, now we do have chairperson or just chair is the preferred term. Instead of doorman, we get door attendant. So fireman, you will use firefighter, so you represent men and women. Freshman, and now we say first year students. Yes, you used to be called freshman, right? But if you consider the term, 100 years ago, it was difficult to find women at university, right? So there were very few women at university, so it was obvious that they created the term with only masculine and not feminine. So this is not the case anymore, as you can see, right? So you are now called first-year students, and this is rather neutral, right? Handyman is now called maintenance person. Headmaster, so master is masculine, the feminine will be mistress, but we don't have headmistress, right? And instead of this, well, you just say principal, so that the gender is avoided. So these are changes which are really important for the English language because they are very quick changes, actually. And if you look at these words in the dictionary, you may still find them, but they are considered as old-type sexist words. So you should try to avoid them, and you should try to remember that in your own communication or in modern writing, actually, you should use the neutral terms and not the old ones. But at least you should try, okay? You can find other expressions of the old version of some words with the stereotypes again, the color magenta for the feminine and the blue for the masculine. So, for example, housewife, now we do say homemaker. For Frenchman, we say French person. For maid, we say Hausdiener. For postman, we say postal worker. For mankind, we say humanity, humankind. For master, you say expert. For masterpiece, remember master is masculine and the feminine is mistress, but we don't have mistress piece, right? So instead of masterpiece, you say great work of art. So other changes in English usage. When you address people, you say Miss or Mrs., right? You can use both. You can use Miss or Mrs., but actually this term is considered as sexist because when you say Miss or Mrs., you indicate the marital status. When you use Mr., so MR for the man, so when you say Mr., we don't know. We have no idea if the man is married or not, right? So this is neutral. So for the masculine term, you don't know. So what happens nowadays is that they change it and created a new term, which is mid, on the second line. So MS is written MS, pronounced mid. And if you use mid, well then you avoid the fact to mention the marital status of the woman. Right? It's neutral. You don't know. You don't know if the woman is married or not. So in official writing, if someone signs their name Mrs., you can answer and use the same title. That's fine, okay? But when you don't know, or if the person doesn't use anything, okay, then you should use the mid version. Alright, so that you're sure. Other changes, other example, mother tongue. We now say native language, first language, which are more neutral and not linked to gender. When we look at psychological research, mother tongue is still an important term because if you're interested in the psychological effects of language acquisition or the learning of a foreign language, you will read a lot of things about the fact that the acquisition of the language is linked with the relationship with the mother. So, for some fields, for some research fields, the term mother tongue is still important, but still they decided to have something more neutral and have native language first language. For spokesman, spokeswomen, well, we do say spokeswoman. sure to avoid again the gender. Here is a quote from a social linguistic expert, so Roman Watlov. What does he say? There is now a greater awareness in some parts of the community that subtle and sometimes not so subtle distinctions are made in the vocabulary choice used to describe men and women. Consequently, we can understand why there is a frequent insistence that neutral words be used as much as possible as in describing occupations: chairperson, letter career, sales clerk, and actor, as in she is an actor. We used to say she is an actor, right? So, this is about language and society again, and about vocabulary usage, right? So again, there are several versions of new neutral terms, terms that you may not know, but this is the direction of the change, right? In English. And this is a friendly advice, actually, that you have the choice. When you have the choice, it sounds better to use the neutral terms than the old sexist terms, right? Even if sometimes this term sounds weird, because when we say sales clerk, actually it's a bit weird. You know what a sales clerk is? It's a vendeur, right? But still, these kind of words will get into usage very quickly in English, so be sure about that, right? Okay, gender neutral pronouns. Remember we talk about the generic he. Apart from vocabulary, well, we do have changes in grammar as well. So there is this kind of social urge to make language less sexist. 20 years ago, people started to get rid of the masculine default terms and mention both possibilities of the speaker being men or women. So you obtain something like this. When someone gets ready to find a new job, she needs to be aware that there are many challenges in this difficult market. It's up to her, him, to research any job opening carefully. So you can see that this is an intermediate stage when someone doesn't know when the person is a man or a woman. In that case, you indicate both, right? So you indicate both options. But it's a bit clumsy, right? So nowadays, people start using the plural. So the English, when you use the plural in English, it's neutral. Unlike in French, which is not neutral, then in English it is. So it gives something like this. At the beginning, you have the student has to be on time and take careful notes. He, she also needs to do homework every month. So that's the intermediate stage. And now, when we use the plural, the idea would be students have to be on time and take careful notes. They also need to do homework every month. So things are much more simpler this way. So by using a generic plural term, you avoid the problem of identifying the speaker as a man or a woman. So it is a change in grammar, which has been around for about 2 decades, right? So not very old, but the change is very quick. And the use of they will be soon considered as a general term. So you should keep that in mind, right, in your own writing. Let's have a look at something else. Something that we call folk linguistic. So we're going to talk about folk linguistic views on women's language. comes to the topic, to this topic. And generally, the issue, the result is a folk linguistic views. What does that mean? Well, it's just that what ordinary people think about women's language, and generally they are not complementary, right? So people think women's language is inferior to men's language. That's the basic idea. So people who work on the topic gender and language try to look at reality. And here what you can see on the right of the slide is the cover of a book which was very influential. It was a book written by Abby Kaplan, and the title is Women Talk More Than Men and Other Myths About Language Explained. So, women talk more than men actually is a stereotype. And most people think that, including women, actually. So, researchers are interested in what are beyond these stereotypes, because these stereotypes have some kind of truth deep hidden in them, and the extent of this truth is subject to scientific research. So we need to do more work about that and to find clues, evidence of these differences. Nowadays, we do have many studies about gender and language. And here, I'm going to mention only two seminal works. So seminal is innovative, okay? So the very first influential books about the topic. The first one comes from the United States. It was written by Robin Langage. It is called Language and the Women's Place. So it was in 1975. And it's about the shift to gender differences in discourse. 5 years later, you have another book written by Dale Tanner, so in 1980, called Man-Made Language. It's about the same idea, right? So that's the two very first important studies that you have on the topic. Of course, nowadays you have many works, many publications about the topic published every year, even. And the topic is studied according to different variables, right? And different objects as well. So the first publication, so the one from Robin Lakoff. What does it say? Actually, it is about the women's talk. And Lakoff said that it has specific characteristics. So it's a bit outdated. Remember, it's from the 70s. So it's a bit old, right? But that's what he thought at that time. So when describing women language in respect to men language, what he found is that, for example, for vocabulary items, according to him, women use a large set of words specific to their interests. And for example, color words, so like magenta, and then shirt, dark, so vocabulary used according to the occupation, according to the activity. So here it's about students, right? Shirt, dark. But we do have change in occupation for women now, so again, it's probably outdated and we need to prove that. Another characteristic of the women's talk is the use of what we call empty adjectives. So you have a few examples here: divine, precious, lovely, cute. So women are supposed to use these more often than men. Is that true? We need to check. Tag questions and writing intonation in statement context. What's your name? Is not a very good actor, is he? What's the point here is that traditionally in English, when you ask a question, when you say, what's your name, what's the day today, what's the weather like, the voice falls down. And like when you speak in French, your voice rises all the time. Okay? In English, your voice falls down. But according to him, when the question is asked by a woman, there is a large tendency to have a rising voice. So saying, what's your name? He's not a very good actor, is he? I suppose that the main of this is to be nicer. Let's check that. We don't know. That's what he thought, again, at that time. Another characteristic, the use of hedges. So women should use a lot, I suppose, I imagine, probably, sort of. So these are language items which modulate the message. So again, the idea to be nicer when you talk. Another characteristic, the use of intensive so. So brave, so expensive, so blah blah blah, and you have a question?
To know that I'm not sure I see what empty adjective means.
Oh. If you look at the adjective divine, precious, lovely, out of context like this for you, it means something, of course, yeah. But when you include them in the sentence, it doesn't really refer to something really specific. It's divine, it's precious, but they use them all the time for anything. So the value of the adjective is a bit lost. You see what I mean? That's why we say empty. Another characteristic is about grammar. The hypercorrect grammar. So women are not supposed to talk both. So women's languages thought to be more correct than the language of the man. Another point is the super politeness. So women are supposed to be very, very polite, more polite than men. The last one, women ask more questions than men. Well, obviously it is difficult to quantify and point these things. That's what we thought at that time, right? But what we need to do today is to work on the large database, the current database from our days, right? And to check these hypotheses, because there are only hypotheses, right? So we need to check with concrete current data all these things. So mainly to recap, we can say that research suggests there are differences between women and men speaks. It has been claimed that women are more polite. Women may use different linguistic forms, like just, literally, so, like, and they also apologize excessively. And again, this needs to be checked on data. Okay? Another aspect of linguistic features that you can find in women's and men's speech. This is a table. A table which displays the features which again are stereotypically ascribed to gender. So it is only the use of specific terms, but also the way men and women behave in conversation that is supposed to be different, like exchanging ideas in language. So if you look at the first line, it's about the discourse structure. So women are supposed to use tag and questions to structure the talk. Men will use them less frequently. And they are more giving a speech. So men are giving speech, are supposed to give speech, sorry, but women are more into interaction. The second line, the level of politeness, is said to be different as well. Women tend to read communication intention with more indirect speech, whereas men use more direct speech. Another point is about emotionality. Men's conversation is supposed to be less emotional. Of course, women's speech is supposed to be more emotional. And finally, the last line, conversational topics, discourse content. Women have a preference for personal topics. So what it means actually is that they have a preference for gossip, contrary to men, which prefer factual topics.
Les filles préfèrent parler des trucs personnels.
So again, these researches were done in 1999, right? So they may have changed, and we don't know who is right or not, and it is worth looking into it. So if you want to have a clear view of what's happening, you will need to look at data, and probably be finding maybe wrong or partially wrong in a more current database. So if you're really interested in the topic, well, maybe what you can do is if you study in master and study linguistics, and why not study gender, right? Just to finish, we're going to talk a little bit about popular beliefs. So popular beliefs about what people think about how conversations, men and women behave. So this is what people think again. It's not based on research. So you can ask yourself about your own experience with your surroundings, and you're going to tell me what you think. So popular beliefs will say that men interrupt women more than vice versa. Is that true? Do you agree?
No.
I don't know. Well, maybe now you're aware of it, so try to observe it when you speak to others. Another belief, women are more communicative than men. It's true. We don't know actually. Men do not give verbal recognition of the contributions in the conversation made by women. Well, that means they do not acknowledge what women are saying. Men curse more than women. Do you know what curse means? Yeah? Okay. Women gossip more than men. Is that true? Women talk more with one another than men do. And finally, men speak more comfortably in public than women. So now that you have these ideas in mind, try to check that around you, right? And make your own experience of this. But again, all these are popular beliefs and not based on research. So you need data and corpus to check that. You know what a corpus is or not? No? So a corpus is a collection of writings or a collection of recordings that you use to analyze and study the question you're interested in. Okay? So finally, to finish about this topic about gender and sexism, here are another example of the use of language. Language, again, which is not sexist. This is the use of the language which is sexist, right? You get that idea? So, from this picture, what you can conclude is that most people accept this kind of stereotypes. And you can spot the acceptance of stereotypes by what people print on the t-shirt, alright? So, these are kids' clothes. But sometimes you find it for adults' clothes as well. So you can see that people are conditioned very early to sexist stereotypes, and even looking at the color. The first example, on the left, training to be Batman. The color is black, so that's for boy or man. And you have Batman. But when you look for the feminine version of the shirt, what you have is the pink color, and you don't have any Batwoman. But what you have is a training to be Batman's wife. The other example, we suppose that the shirt for the boy will be the blue one, and the teacher says, be a hero. But when we look at the feminine version of the shirt, the woman is not a hero, she needs a hero, right? So, even if you change the color, it will be still typical and stereotypical sexist language, right? So you can see that you have women around you. So keep in mind these issues, try to think about it. Keep in mind the idea that the language is not sexist, but that the society uses it, right? And the kind of uses the name of language makes sense. Okay? Do you have any questions? Everything
No.
clear? Yeah?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
attention.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Attends, je range mes affaires. Ouais. Je range mes affaires. Là. On va m'appeler, je peux